Understanding rural Minnesota's economy is tricky. So many factors go into the calculations. Regions and counties can vary greatly. The data map of Minnesota is dotted with exceptions and nuance. But when you're looking for a job, nuance is not your focus. Job seekers want to know the simple facts. How much will I be paid? And how good of a life will that wage buy for me and my family? And when employers in rural Minnesota advertise themselves as an option, job seekers and employers fall into the same old debate. The job seekers say, "But wages in rural Minnesota are so low." The employers respond, "But the cost of living in rural Minnesota is so low." But are those assumptions true? Are rural wages low? And how low is the cost of living outside of the Twin Cities metro? Well, wages may have been lower in rural Minnesota in the past, but recently the game has become a lot more competitive. Wages in rural Minnesota are rising. Not only that, but they are climbing faster than in the 7-county metro area. So yes, your wages may be lower in rural Minnesota, but not by very much. What has also changed in greater Minnesota is that there are more job vacancies. Demographic shifts and retirements have made job markets across the state a lot more competitive. Employers are kicking in more incentives to convince rural high schoolers to work where they grew up and to lure families away from the metro. So, one of our initial assumptions is flawed. Wages are not so low in rural Minnesota. Wages are rising, and the job market is more competitive. Then what about our other assumption? Is the cost of living in rural Minnesota lower than in the metro? Let's take a hypothetical family of 3, 2 parents and a child, and see what happens to their wages and cost of living in different parts of the state. Both of our parents work, one full-time, the other part-time. Together, they work a little over 3,000 hours a year. We'll use the Center for Rural Policy and Development's online cost of living tool to look at our family's costs in a number of different categories: housing, transportation, food, childcare, healthcare, taxes, and other necessities like clothes, personal care, and education. Our family lives in a lovely 2-bedroom home, has 1 car to get to work and to stores, and buys food at a moderate cost. Our family is lucky to have found part-time childcare and gets their healthcare from the MNsure Marketplace. Their taxes are simulated between the upper and lower bounds of an expected income, and their other necessities are calculated in proportion to their food and housing costs, 16%. Now that we have our family, where do their wages go further? Breaking our family's expenses out into categories shows some surprising results. The cost of food, healthcare, transportation, and other necessities are pretty much the same in rural Minnesota and the metro, but the other categories are where we find the real differences. Housing is about 1/3 cheaper in rural Minnesota. Taxes are about 40% lower in rural Minnesota. And childcare is about half as expensive in rural Minnesota. It looks like the second of our initial assumptions is true. The cost of living in rural Minnesota is lower. Now we have wage data and cost of living data. It seems only logical that we calculate wages as a percentage of the cost of living. Then we can compare different regions and different industries to see just how far wages can go. Our economists did just that and learned some interesting things. If we break monthly median wages apart by industry and region, we see that the Twin Cities metro workers are paid more in most fields. But if we recalculate these numbers to show wages as a percentage of the cost of living, rural Minnesota jumps into the lead in most industries. It's easy to see that these data can paint a very promising picture for all of rural Minnesota. But it is important that we recognize that rural Minnesota is not one homogeneous territory with uniform wages and costs. Some industries pay more than others, and are more common in some counties than others. There are more financial jobs around the Twin Cities. There are more healthcare jobs around Rochester. And there are more education jobs in northern Minnesota. And some expenses are higher in different parts of rural Minnesota. The 7-county metro obviously has a higher cost of living, but there are some stretches of rural Minnesota with unexpectedly high expenses, like Isanti, Chisago, Kanabec, Pine, and Aitkin counties. When we combine our charts, we can see, county by county, what wages are like across the state as a percentage of cost of living. We learn that slightly lower wages in most regions of Minnesota go just as far as wages in the metro area. With rural job vacancies at an all-time high, employers are feeling the pressure to adopt new strategies to recruit and retain workers. By focusing on cost of living, many industries and regions can prove that rural Minnesota holds the competitive advantage. The Center for Rural Policy and Development has created a new tool for you to explore Minnesota's wages and cost of living data. Get a more complete view of rural Minnesota by visiting ruralmn.org.